After walking for about an hour, our originally light backpacks had gradually become heavier and heavier until it felt like they had been filled with lead. We slowed so much we were barely making any progress. Ever since we entered Sage Academy, we had relied on our Cantus to do a lot of work for us, and so probably neglected to train our bodies, but even above that, having our powers taken from us made us feel even more weak and helpless. Once in a while, Regin would come down from his lotus seat and observe our turtle-like movements with an expression of disdain and irritation, but he never said a word. He probably thought it was useless to talk to us. The lotus seat floated 2 meters off the ground. Regin sat upon it, cross-legged, as if meditating. We lagged about 30 meters behind, looking up at him as if from the bottom of a pond. "That's true levitation," Shun whispered, as if trying to suppress his emotions. Even adults who had mastered all the classes in Sage Academy couldn't necessarily do it, and compared to us making the canoe speed through the water, this was on a completely different level. I get making something float while you're riding it, but exactly what image is he using to propel himself through the air? In the beginning Cantus courses, we first learned to move a stationary object. In order to move yourself through the air, you have to focus on a fixed point around you, which is a lot more difficult. For people like Regin, who have trained extensively, their image probably uses themselves as a fixed point while the rest of the world flows around them. What image he's using doesn't even matter anymore, right? Satoru said bitterly. It's not like we'll ever get to use our Cantus again. We all fell silent. Mamoru, who had been on the verge of tears this whole time, finally broke down crying. Maria also let out a sob. "That's not true. Don't say stuff like that." I glared at Satoru. "We'll definitely be able to use it again." "How do you know?" Satoru said, staring back with an unusual ferocity. "We haven't lost our Cantus, it's just been temporarily sealed." "Do you really think they're going to unseal it?" Satoru leaned in close to me, a note of menace in his voice. "You remember what the false Minoshiro said, right? We're rotten apples that know too much. We'll be targeted for removal soon." "That's—" I had nothing to say in return. "Isn't it weird, though, Saki?" Shun turned and whispered even more quietly than Satoru. "What's weird?" "That Regin priest. He's been acting strangely for a while now." I looked up at him carefully. "I don't see anything strange. Wasn't he always like that?" Satoru muttered with barely a glance at Regin. "Wait, he does look weird." Until now, I had only been paying attention to our own problems and hadn't noticed. But Regin was indeed acting strangely. His body movements as he was sitting were abnormal. Since he was in a seated meditation pose, he should have been breathing with his abdomen, but his shoulders were heaving visibly as he breathed. There was also a sheen of sweat on the back of his head. "Maybe he's sick," Shun said. "So what's it to us? Why should we have to worry about him?" Satoru complained. "No, it's just what I thought." Shun appeared to have confirmed his suspicions. "What do you think it is?" "The curse of the false Minoshiro." Satoru snorted. "I already said that was a lie, didn't I? It's just a rumor." "No, seems like it's not exactly a lie. Remember when the false Minoshiro burned up?" Shun directed the question toward me. "Yeah, of course. Just for a second, there was the image of a person floating above it, right? A mother holding a child." "What about it?" "I think that's probably an image it uses to protect itself from people." "That's what I thought too. When I saw it, it made me feel really sick. You guys did as well, right? And not to mention, since Regin attacked the false Minoshiro, he would feel it even more. The reason the fire went out was probably because he lost his concentration." "So you mean that feeling is the effect?" I didn't quite grasp the point yet. "It's the death feedback. Just like the false Minoshiro said." I gasped. Why hadn't I realized what he was saying earlier? After the false Minoshiro shows the image, all it needs is a moment's pause in the enemy's attack for it to escape. But for humans, just one moment is enough to trigger the feedback, though since they're not attacking a real human, it wouldn't kill them instantly. I can't help being astonished at the depth of Shun's analysis at that time. Later research showed it is very likely that the curse of the false Minoshiro is indeed based on death feedback's particular vulnerability. When you see an image like that, even if it's an illusion, the idea that you are committing an atrocious act of harming another human lingers in your subconscious. A month or two later, when your rational control weakens, the memory will resurface and the death feedback might just kill you. So are you saying he'll be dead in a month or so? Satoru asked gloatingly, for destroying library property. Possibly even earlier than that, Shun said thoughtfully, looking up at Regin. Isn't that even better? If he dies, he won't be able to tell on us for what we did, Satoru replied. Don't say stupid things like that, I hissed. None of us can use our Cantus now, right? If he does die and leaves us here, how in the world are we going to get back home? Even though those were my own words, when I saw the fear in their eyes, I shuddered as well. I realized again just how helpless we were. But if we kept going toward the Temple of Purity, I don't think we could expect to receive a warm welcome, just as Satoru said. No matter how I thought of it, our disposal seemed the only conclusion. Though that may be true, if we tried to escape recklessly, we might end up in an even worse situation, out of the frying pan and into the fire. There was no way out of the situation. In this way, 2 hours passed. Our pace became slower and slower until it felt like a snail could overtake us. At this rate, I doubted we would ever make it to the Temple of Purity. There was a noise in the bushes on my left. Regin turned around. Leaves and shrubs flew through the air. Its concealment gone, the creature in hiding was revealed. A queerat, Shun whispered. I thought back to that day after school, where we had seen 2 queerats almost drown in the canals. This one was visibly larger, maybe even as tall as I was. It looked as if it hadn't figured out what had happened yet, sniffing at the air with its wrinkled snout. But it seems kind of different. I had the same feeling as Maria. It had bows and arrows slung over its back and was wearing what looked like leather armor. But it was not just its equipment that was strange. Something else was off. What's up with it? It has such an insolent attitude. Satoru hit the nail on the head. All the queerats we had seen before definitely didn't behave like this. The 2 goat moth queerats we had rescued had been so polite they were almost groveling, even towards us children. In contrast, this queerat showed not an ounce of fear as it stood in front of Regin's lotus seat. Suddenly, it turned and started shouting, "Ga-ga-ga-ga-ga! Grr! Chi-chi-chi-chi-chi-chi!" What followed was unbelievable. It drew an arrow and aimed it at Regin, glaring with its red, beady eyes. In an instant, both bow and arrow were consumed in white flames. The queerat dropped them with a shriek and tried to run, but Regin caught it with his Cantus and dragged it back, kicking and screaming. You, a mere beast, dare raise your hands against me? Regin said coldly as the queerat made incomprehensible noises. The queerat's cone-shaped hat was blown away. No tattoo, huh? Where did you come from? The queerat bared its yellow teeth and snarled menacingly. It didn't seem to understand words. There are no wild colonies in Japan, so you must be a foreign species, Regin muttered. Like we had done to the tiger crabs, he turned the queerat around to examine it. And he did it again, this time keeping the head still. The queerat let out one last shriek, then went limp as its neck snapped. Regin turned back toward us. The queerat's corpse thudded to the ground. It seems a foreign species has somehow managed to invade our land. Since I'm responsible for bringing you all safely to the temple, this is somewhat problematic, Regin grimaced. Therefore, you must help as well. Of course, only to the extent that you are able to. There was a faint noise, and Satoru flinched and spun around to look behind us. The panic on his face was really starting to stress me out. If you're going to turn around every 10 seconds, why don't you just walk backwards? What are you talking about? Anyway, how can you be walking along so unconcernedly? Like I said earlier, you're just totally oblivious, Satoru snapped back. Look at Shun and Maria. They're walking at the very front, and neither are as scared as you are. You idiot! You don't understand. The last person is always in the most danger. Satoru's face flushed with anger. Don't you remember that queerat from earlier was calling to something behind it? Its allies could be anywhere. I know that. Then don't you think it's possible they'll retaliate? And if they do, why would they come from the front? They'd be seen, right? I didn't want to admit it, but he had a very good point. The reason I didn't want to admit it was not because I didn't want to lose to Satoru. Regin must be well aware of the fact that being rearguard was more dangerous. In other words, it probably meant he thought Shun and Maria were more worth protecting, while Satoru and I were disposable. But going by this theory, it seemed like the one he valued the most was also the one he was treating the most cruelly, Mamoru. Mamoru was sitting on the lotus seat. Under the pretense of being lookout, Regin was floating the seat higher than before, about 3 meters off the ground. But it was obvious to everyone that he was using Mamoru as a decoy. Regin was walking close behind, his sharp hawk-like eyes looking in every direction. He was also sweating profusely, which was caused by the false Minoshiro's projection, but it had gotten visibly worse since he killed the queer rat. "Something's there," Mamoru shouted from the lotus seat. "Halt," Regin commanded. We halted, looking around anxiously. "What do you see?" "I can't really tell, but something's moving. About 100 meters ahead," Mamoru replied, his lip quivering. Regin appeared to be in deep thought. "What's he thinking about?" I asked Satoru. Satoru licked his lips. "If the queerats are lying in wait and we keep going, we'll be in range of their arrows," he explained calmly. "No matter how much power that priest has, he's still only human. He's still vulnerable to preemptive strikes by the enemy, so it's best we proceed with caution in a situation like this. Even with the omnipotent power of Cantus, you'd still die if you were shot." It was a sobering thought. Still, if things were going to turn out like this, I would rather our Cantus not have been sealed. I'm sure Regin was regretting it too. I hoped that he would decide to unseal our powers, but unfortunately we had no such luck. "Mamoru Ito," Regin looked up at the lotus seat. "Listen up. Are there any queerats? Take a good look. Don't be afraid. I will protect you with my Cantus. Not a single one of their arrows will touch you." Mamoru's face blanched as he realized what was about to happen. "And no, stop." The rest of us held our breaths as the lotus seat drifted ahead to where we thought the queerats might be hiding and stopped. The seat spun around once or twice. We waited anxiously, but nothing happened. Finally, Regin brought the lotus seat back and fixed Mamoru with a hard look. "Well, were there our queerats? I don't know." Mamoru's face was completely bloodless and he trembled like a tiny, frightened animal. "I didn't see anything." "Didn't you say that something moved?" "But I didn't see anything just now. I was probably wrong earlier." Regin nodded but did not set off again immediately. He was not only a skilled Cantus user, but astute as well. After deliberating for a while, he looked up again. "You said you saw movement somewhere around there," Regin pointed. Mamoru nodded silently. "Sterilization it is, then." There was a rumbling sound and the ground a ways ahead of us started moving. The trees fell one by one. The earth churned like a giant writhing snake as rocks and dirt came crashing down. In less than 5 minutes, the grove of beautiful green trees was buried under a mountain of soil. We would never know whether queerats were really hiding there, but I guess it didn't really matter anymore. From now on, our progress would be even slower. Needless to say, we were a bit wary of the area Regin had just sterilized. Looking back, it was as if the destroyer Shiva had ridden through on his juggernaut, ravaging the peaceful scenery, leaving behind a procession of death and fear. Now, no matter how belligerent these foreign queerats were, they would be stupid to even think about attacking us head-on. But this outcome was disadvantageous for everyone involved. The queerats had their path blocked off, so we wouldn't be susceptible to a direct attack. But this also been the quickest way for us to reach the Temple of Purity before sundown. Needless to say, the only reason we were even in a hurry in the first place was due to the appearance of the foreign queerats. The cause and consequence were the same, going round and round like an Ouroboros. When we had climbed halfway up the newly formed hill, we saw the first rows of the queerats' defensive formation. "Ah, what's that?" Shun said from the head of the line. As we crested the hill, hundreds of silhouettes suddenly came into view. The silhouettes were all beating weapons, gongs, and other metallic objects, creating an earth-shaking battle cry. "It looks like they're getting ready to charge this way." Maria's voice twisted into a shriek. "You have no place in the 3 realms. It is only through Buddha's grace that you can exist as beasts. And yet you insist on foolishly challenging me," Regin said gravely. "Very well, I shall exorcise you." No, I thought. They didn't actually want to fight us. If the queerats truly intended to attack us, they would have rushed us from behind. But they didn't. Instead, they deliberately made themselves visible in hopes that we would redirect our route. As I listened, their war cry sounded more like a painful supplication than a call to battle. A gust of wind swept past my cheeks. Looking up, I saw Regin creating what looked like a giant tornado. As if in response, the Quirret's war cry grew. In the next instant, all the debris from the tornado was flung down the hill. Flying logs and boulders mowed down the rows of Quirrats in no time. There was a second's pause, then with scream of fear and rage, a barrage of arrows came raining down on us. But the arrows were no match for the wind, which sent them spinning away wildly. "You filthy pests will be exterminated," Regin said ominously, his voice hoarse. "Stop!" I screamed, but no one heard me. My voice was drowned out by the howling wind that sounded like a knife ripping through silk, or like a woman's shriek, but an octave higher. In that instant, I thought I saw countless winged, scythe-wielding demonesses rising out of the ground and swooping down on the Quirrets. Regardless of whether that vision was real or not, the Quirrets fell in rapid succession. I realized it was a wind scythe, an intense whirlwind with a vacuum in the center that acted like innumerable knives, tearing the victim to pieces. In order to create a wind scythe with your cantus, you needed to accurately imagine the movement of the air, something that by nature was invisible and formless, so it was an extremely difficult technique that few could master. In the blink of an eye, the Quirrets were decimated. My head was swimming. I could see the spray of blood and smell its disgusting stench, even though in reality, I was too far away to do either. "All right, he did it. Look there, it's getting away." Next to me, Satoru was yelling excitedly, like this massacre was some sort of game. "Are you stupid? What are you so happy about?" I said sharply. Satoru looked blankly at me. "But they're our enemies, aren't they?" "They're not our real enemies." "Then who is?" Before I could answer, it was over. The genocide in the name of Buddha, carried out by the priest who had sworn to serve him. There was not a single silhouette left standing on the hill. "Okay, let us continue on," Regin commanded, but his voice was strained. Satoru and I glanced at each other. As we climbed the hill, the terrible scene of the Quirrat's demise came into view. Ravaged corpses, severed heads, and shredded limbs were piled high all around us. Rust-colored blood soaked into every surface, dyeing the ground black, the smell stinging my eyes and nose. Flies that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere were already starting to feast on the remains. Ahead of us, Shun and Maria faltered before the huge swarm of flies. Regin could tell that we all hoped he would get rid of the flies, but the priest simply stood there with no signs of moving. "What's going on?" Satoru asked quietly. "The silhouettes," I thought instinctively. From a distance, didn't the silhouette of a Quirrat look a lot like a human's? Since Regin was already under the false Minoshiro's curse, when he killed the Quirrats with the wind scythe, his subconscious probably interpreted it as him attacking more humans. If that was true, death feedback might really get him this time. "Regin, are you all right?" Shun asked. "Yes, don't worry," Regin replied after a pause. His eyes seemed vacant and his words sounded strange. All our attention was on Regin, so we didn't notice that something was crawling among the corpses, hidden by the curtain of flies. "What's that?" Maria gasped as she turned around. A strange animal. It was the size of a dog, covered in long black fur. In contrast to its stout body, the head was abnormally small and so low that it almost touched the ground as it slunk toward us. "A blow dog," Mamoru cried in a strangled voice. "What are you talking about? They're not real," Satoru said bluntly, still completely disregarding the fact that he had just recently been seriously trying to convince us of the existence of blow dogs. "But no matter how you look at it, that's what it is," Mamoru said, standing up for his own views for once. "So you're saying it's going to inflate itself to the size of a balloon? Something so stupid." As if in response to Satoru's words, the animal, the blow dog, suddenly swelled like a balloon. Whoa, it really puffed up. I thought it was simply sucking in air to make itself look bigger, but as the blow dog glared at us, it swelled even more. "Everyone, get back!" At Shun's words, we all started running, putting as much distance between us and the blow dog as possible. "What's going to happen?" I asked. "I don't know." Shun seemed fascinated, but so far it's acting just as Satoru said it would. It might just keep swelling up until it explodes. As if in accordance with Shun's words, the blow dog puffed up even more. "What for?" "It's a threat," he whispered. "A threat. It's probably trying to drive us away from that spot. The blowdog slowly advanced toward Region, the only person who hadn't backed away. Seeing no response from Region, it swelled up further. It was now the size of a fat sheep. But why wasn't Region moving? I looked at him curiously, but all he did was stand there with his eyes closed. Maybe he was dazed. The blowdog paused for a moment, waiting silently, then suddenly ballooned to 3 times its size. Its body was almost entirely spherical now, and white rays of light radiated from between the coarse bristles. A warning sign. "Oh, run!" Shun yelled. We took off like a shot, barreling down the hill as fast as we could go. The others ran without looking back, but curiosity got the better of me and I stopped. Turning around, I saw that the blowdog had now swelled to a frightening size. Finally, Region opened his eyes. I didn't have time to say a word before the blowdog was enveloped in dazzling flames. There was a thunderous roar and a fierce gust of wind knocked us over. We were about 30 meters downhill from the blowdog. If we had been on level ground, the blast would have killed us for sure. I don't really want to write about what happened afterward. We needed some time to recover from the shock. Then we went to look at the crater left by the explosion. Raijin had been so close to the explosion that his body was now an unrecognizable mess. Since we couldn't use our Cantus to bury him, we simply covered him with dirt. That simple task made me want to throw up. "Saki, look at this." Shun pulled out something that had been deeply embedded into the ground and held it out. "What is it?" I hesitated, not taking the object from him. He held it up for me to get a better look. It looked like a disc surrounded by 6 sharp, feather-like spikes sticking out in alternate directions. Looks like a water wheel propeller. It's probably part of the blowdog's spine. Its spine. Satoru came and took it from Shun, turning it over in his hands. "It's hard as stone and heavy too. If you got hit with this, you'd probably die." "They're shaped like this so that when the blowdog dies, they'll come flying out." "Flying out for what?" "To kill its opponent." As I looked around, I saw many more of them sticking out of the ground. Goosebumps stood out on my arms. I didn't know the blowdog could do this much damage. Satoru brought the bone to his nose and sniffed it. "What are you doing?" I imagined the smell of blood and grymest. "It smells kinda like fireworks." "Oh, I get it," Shun said, seemingly to himself. "Blowdogs probably have sulfur and saltpeter stored in their bodies so they can make gunpowder. Just inflating themselves to the point of bursting wouldn't create such a powerful explosion. Some of its bones act as flint to create the spark that sets everything off." Wait, are there really animals that have evolved to become suicide bombers? It wasn't unusual for animals to try to appear larger in order to intimidate its enemies, but isn't blowing yourself up when the enemy ignores your warnings extremely counterproductive? "Yeah, Shun, you even said so before we came here. If blowdogs kept blowing themselves up, they'd become extinct in no time." That's what I thought, but I just remembered that there was an animal a lot like the blowdog in one of the ancient biology books I read. He said. "There are more of them?" Satoru and I said in unison. "Yeah, and by analogy, I have a rough idea of what blowdogs really are." "What? Oh, really? So is it a balloon or a dog?" Satoru joked. "That was our reaction to shock, to lose our heads just a little bit." "Stop talking about stupid things," Maria finally exploded. "Do you even understand the situation we're in? We've been abandoned in the middle of nowhere, and on top of that, none of us can use our Cantus." We stopped smiling. "You're right," Shun said, after a heavy silence. "In any case, let's head back the way we came. We'll have to sleep out in the open tonight." "Hey!" Satoru said nervously, grabbing Shun by the arm. He jerked his chin toward the crater. Following his gaze, we froze. A group of silhouettes stood 40 or 50 meters ahead, watching us silently. Quirats. "What do we do?" Maria's voice shook. "Isn't it obvious? We march up and attack," Satoru replied. "Attack? How are we supposed to do that without Cantus?" I shot back. "They don't know that. If we run, it'll expose our weakness, and they'll come after us." "But if we go, we'll be captured," Mamoru said in a thin voice. "Exactly. We have to run," Maria said. As I looked at the Quirats, I was filled with conviction. They definitely don't want to fight. They just want us to leave. "How do you know? If that was the case, they should have left first," Satoru said stubbornly. "Their burrows are over there. That's why this group was here defending their burrows in the face of death." The blowdog must also have been— Okay, let's all back away slowly, Shun said. He only ever took charge when it was absolutely necessary. Be quiet, don't provoke them. We're done for if they think we're afraid. He didn't need to say any more. We retreated as quietly as possible. Soon it became dark, and every time I heard the crunch of rocks being stepped on, I was filled with fear. The Quirits watched closely as we backed down the hill, but showed no signs of pursuing us. I guess Saki was right. They don't want to fight, Maria said, sounding relieved. It's too early to say that for sure, Satoru said gloomily. They might be waiting for us to let our guard down before attacking. Why do you keep saying that? I snapped. Do you enjoy scaring us? Fine, should I say something stupidly optimistic then? Satoru retorted. Satoru's probably right, Shun said unexpectedly. Why? Saki's right that they don't want to fight over there, maybe because that's where their nests are. But once we get far enough away, who knows what they'll do? But what's the point in attacking? Dude, did you not see what Regin did earlier? How many Quirats do you think he killed? They're not going to be satisfied with just having one of us dead. Satoru's logic was depressingly sound. But they probably think we still have Cantus, right? They should be trying to avoid more meaningless deaths, Maria said. Shun shook his head. Like Regin said, they're a foreign species. They might have been civilized in the beginning, but have lost contact with humans for a long time. Remember that first scout that was caught? It didn't seem to know what Cantus was. That's true, but shouldn't they have learned to fear it by now? I said quietly, trying to think from their point of view. Yeah, that's why they haven't attacked us yet, but at best they only half believe in our powers. Why? They're probably thinking that if they had the same powers we did, they would have slaughtered us a long time ago. There was a silence so heavy that it was hard to breathe. What'll they do from now on? Satoru asked Shun. Once we get far enough from the nests, it's very likely they'll try to strike back. And what happens when we can't retaliate? Shun's silence was answer enough. So how far away from the nest is far enough? Maria asked worriedly. I don't know for sure. Shun looked uphill. The most dangerous place is probably at the bottom of the hill.